I like this textbook because it has a little tiny boxes sometimes, and in little boxes they give you kind of life examples. And this is a cool little one that they always put in a blue box. It says, speaking of ethics, what we always have to consider is that some people might be misleading us, and they might be misleading us deliberately. It's a fact of life that people will get up and say things that are untrue. And you have to be able to see through it. Don't assume that, we remember how we talked about that the speaker has this ethos idea there's a relationship between a speaker and an audience, and they have to be trusting them to a degree to say, oh, what this person has to tell me is good and it's trustworthy. Well, it doesn't always exist. There's not always an ethos between a speaker and a listener. Sometimes there's a lack of trust, and sometimes people do that by deliberately misleading things or misquoting things or refusing to say things in a straightforward way. So you see this every single time in advertising, and most of you have become desensitized and you don't buy it. I know you don't buy it, but because smart people can see through it. If you're not so smart, you can probably not see through it. But using percentages rather than absolute numbers is a trick number one in trying to mislead people. Okay? So, for example, what if I said half of my class are A students? Or when I say 50% of my class are A students, or something like that. You don't know how big of a class I'm talking about, right? What if my class has only 2 students? That means I have one bad student and one good student, right? Or what if my class has 200 students? See, that changes things a lot. But by using a percentage, by saying 50%, I am not disclosing to you the real numbers. What if I say 50% of people in this class voted for me to be the president? Well, there's 2 people. So that means one of them voted for me, right? Oh, that gives me great power to say 50% of the people, I got 50% of the popular vote. See, that sounds so good when it's percentage-wise. But if I just say, out of 2 people, 1 voted for me and the other one, that doesn't sound good. So people will use percentages. How about this one? You've probably seen this commercials. They will say 4 out of 3. They'll say 4 out of 5 dentists approve this product, this toothpaste or this toothbrush or something like that. See, the question is, how many dentists did you ask? And then, how many dentists did you ask? How many of them were given free toothbrushes or something like that? Did they get paid? Are they on board of your company? It's like, these are the questions you don't answer. You just say, oh, okay, that's just like random dentists. I went around asking. Well, the truth is that percentages, and they're not always true. So sometimes we just kind of, sample an opinion, but we don't tell people how many people we've sampled, and we're not being honest about it. And all of a sudden, it makes us look a lot better than what it really is. And a lot of times, in speech, one of the biggest bangs that I have is people make these generalizations where they say, well, we all know that the global warming is true, that the world is coming to an end, that the oceans are rising. And people say that, and a lot of times people are like, oh yeah, I'm buying it, and then another person is sitting over there saying, I live by the ocean, it's not rising. I've been living by the ocean all my life. Actually, it's been receding. And they're saying, wait a minute, that's not working. So it's like, a lot of times we just make these generalizations, we just make these broad statements that we're like, oh, we all know such and such is true, which actually may not be true at all. But you make it sound if it's true because you're making this, big, huge global statement, so to say. We all did this, or we all voted for so-and-so, and the truth is, no, we didn't. And these generalizations mislead. So there's a lot of ways to mislead people, so please be aware and cognizant of the fact that not every speech is going to be truthful, And then sometimes when people use these fallacies in a speech, and we'll talk more about fallacies later in the course, there are certain logical fallacies that people use all the time. They get them into trouble. So here's a few questions that the authors propose we ask while we're listening critically to someone's speech. How is the situation affecting my reception of this speech? A lot of times we may not be analyzing speech properly because we are in a place where we can't. Something is distracting us. We're annoyed. We had a bad day. We didn't get our coffee. Broke up with our girlfriend, or our boyfriend left us an annoying message, and it just bothers us, whatever, and we can't get over it. And we're not in a place to be honest about something. It bothers us, so everything else is bad. How is the physical environment affecting the speaker or the people who are listening? If it's too hot, we're all tired and want to go to sleep, or if it's too noisy or distracting, or it's too cold, things like that. And there's the temperature, the lighting, the environment, the noise, the distractions, all that can affect your speech. And so it's not about the speech all of a sudden, it's about all the distractions. And that's not always, helpful. So what do you know about the speaker? Well, if you know that speaker really well, is he credible? Sometimes you listen to somebody whom you know really well, and they don't know what they're talking about. And they're actually making a pretty good speech. But that person doesn't know anything what they're talking about. They sound good, but they really don't know what they're talking about because they got that speech off the internet or something like that. The truth is, sometimes what you know about the speaker or how well you know them can affect your judgment, and you can start judging them in a way that's not actually accurate, because if you didn't know them, you might have seen them differently. Or what you think that person is. You heard somebody say something about that person, that they're bad or evil or dishonest, and all of a sudden you're listening to that person speaking, and you're like, oh, he's a liar, he's a liar, he's a liar. He hasn't lied anything to you yet, but you already said he's a liar. Why? Because somebody else said he's a liar. So all of a sudden he's a liar. And so you don't trust anything he says. Why? Because somebody else said he's a liar. So we can be prejudiced against the speaker. So how believable do I find a speaker? And that's a more honest question. Is what this person says believable or not? Are they being, honest? Are they being accurate? Are they being reasonable? Because if they're not being reasonable, maybe I shouldn't be listening to them. Is the speaker adequately prepared? Sometimes a person has good things to say, but I can tell they're unprepared. I can tell that they don't have their thoughts organized really well. And they jump from one thought to another, and they just keep going back and forth and recapturing another thought, and it's just disorganized. Very difficult to follow. Also hurts their credibility, because all of a sudden you realize, well, that person really didn't think through what they were going to say. What is the speaker's attitude towards the audience? So that's a big one to me. Sometimes you can detect that the speaker is speaking down to an audience. You know that? Speaking down to an audience. Explaining things they shouldn't explain. They shouldn't need to explain. Talk to them like you talk to little children or something like that. Oh, you don't get it. Let me explain this to you. And the truth is, people are a lot smarter than you give them credit. They do get it, but if you treat them as if they're 5-year-olds, and you say, all right, let me explain this little simple concept to you. So talking down to an audience can be a problem. Pandering to an audience can be another problem. Sometimes I see people pander to an audience. They know that this audience has a particular like or dislike, and they'll come out and they'll use that like or dislike to get the audience on their side. That's called pandering. Patronizing the audience. Also, giving them a little something that is going to get them going, because you know it's going to get them going. You're manipulating them, basically. That happens all the time. Now, I don't appreciate that personally, but I see that people do that all the time. So what is your attitude towards an audience? Are you treating your audience as equals? Are you looking down upon them? Are you the teacher? Are they the students? Now, in this environment, obviously that is the setup, right? But if it is not a class environment, if you're at work and you have your coworkers who don't really know any more than you do teaching you how to do your job, that's annoying. Oh, that's so annoying. So it's like, I can't take that. That person doesn't really know what they're talking about, but they're going to try to tell me how to do my job in front of my boss because they want to look important. So, how credible are the ideas they present? Now that's even a better question, whether they're believable. How credible are their ideas? Can we judge a person based on their ideas rather than on their personality, or how they're annoying, or how their tie is tied wrong, or how their earrings are too big, or how their perfume is not so nice? You know, there's sometimes I get, annoyed by people's cologne. I walked into an elevator and the guy's cologne is so terrible, I'm choking. I'm like, did you just pour the whole bottle on yourself or something? Are you really that smelly that you have to drown it out? And it's annoying. And I don't even know this person, but I already don't like him. Why? Because they got too much cologne. Maybe he spilled the bottle this morning. Maybe he got nervous. Who knows? I have no idea why he did that. But I'm judging him. I'm not judging him as a person that he is. I'm just judging him by the feature that he exhibits to me. We do that the same with speakers. A lot of times we're saying, we're judging them based on their looks. Oh, that person looks smart. What they're going to say is going to be really smart. No, they're as dumb as a doornail. or the other way around. That person doesn't look so good. Yet they actually have some good ideas. So judging ideas versus in person is an important feature of critical listening. Can we get past that? Can we put our prejudices aside to listen to the content is the question, I guess, that the authors are raising. Are their ideas well structured? Again, have they thought it through? What is their, if then therefore, sort of say, idea? Is there consequences to what they're saying? And is sufficient evidence being offered or not? Is this person backing up their ideas or not? Are they saying, the kind of information that has something behind it, or is just their opinion? Because if it's just their opinion, then how well do I accept it? But if it has reasons behind it, then maybe I'm much more convinced. So these are sort of say the features of critical listening that can be very helpful. Again, these are the things that you're asking as you're listening to a speech. You're asking of yourself. You're saying, am I listening to this person? Do I like this person, or do I not? Am I not listening to this person so well because I don't like the way they look? Like some men have a hard time accepting information from women, for example. They have a hard time accepting information from women. Having a woman teacher for some men is a problem. Just is. It's culture. It's how they were taught, it's how they were raised, whatever happened in their cultural world, that may just be an issue. Some men cannot have women as bosses. They will be confrontational with their bosses because they cannot be allowed to look under a woman. And that's a cultural issue. And because in their world, where they come from, maybe that doesn't ever happen. So, but these things happen. So can we be truthful with ourselves and saying, am I reacting the way I'm reacting to this person because, I am not evaluating their message, but rather evaluating them and judging them that way. So these are all very helpful questions to keep ourselves in check when we're listening to somebody, because believe it or not, we can be quite prejudiced. We can be very judgmental. We could be very unfair to somebody. And that's not critical listening. Being unfair is not critical listening. Critical listening is judging the message, not the messenger. Is looking at the content rather than the packaging in which it comes. And so, I've seen people who are not so attractive say some, very, very good things, and a lot of attractive people who say nonsense that shouldn't ever be repeated. So that's just fact. That's all it is. It's not always the packaging. Okay. So what can you do to develop your skills? Let's say I'm going over this material and you're saying to yourself, well, some of these things I think I'm okay with, and you're saying to yourself, some of these things I'm not sure I've mastered. I can do better in this area. I can do better in this area. I'm really missing out in this area. Oh, you got me here, kind of an idea. So here's a few suggestions for critical listening that the authors are giving us. They say practice critiquing the speeches of your classmates. So you guys get a chance to do some speeches here. You'll have a chance to critique your classmates. And by critique, I don't mean criticize and just say you did that wrong, you did that wrong, you did that wrong. Is analyze. This was good, this was not so good. This was excellent, that was not so great. And here's why. Don't just say, I like it, I don't like it. We're not talking about chocolate or a cup of tea. We're talking about something objective. That person had a great introduction, but their conclusion was really flat, or so on and so forth. So we critique speeches of other people, whether they be classmates or somebody else, and that gives us a little bit better edge. Listen critically in your other classes. In your classes, you can learn a lot by listening to people who are speaking in front of you, by picking up on the techniques that they're using that you particularly find effective. If there's a class that you're engaged in particularly well, or a teacher that you like where you're really taking a lot out of that class, you have to say to yourself, what is this person doing better than the other one? It could be that they're using a better technique, they're a better communicator. It just makes more sense to you. So, and then listening to speakers outside of class. Every time you're driving, and seeing a commercial, every time you're watching TV or seeing a commercial, every time you see a magazine ad or somebody pitching something, ask these questions. What is this message about? What is the foundation? What is the proof? What is the main idea? What is this person saying? You ask those critical listening questions, and all of a sudden you're like, okay, it's about nothing. I shouldn't be listening to this anyway. So, because of course some communication is for entertainment only, but then others for learning. So when you're learning or trying to comprehend something, you use this critical listening skills. Now, and then the last thing is examine the supporting materials. Examine the arguments, the language, in newspapers and magazines, anything that you consume, examine their evidence. Because people will make all sorts of claims, but they'll have no backup whatsoever. Why? Because they want to sway your opinion in the direction, hoping that you simply will trust them. Because sometimes they don't really have proof, and sometimes the proof they have is not good proof, fake proof, fictional. A good example, for 2 years, our entire country has been debating whether Donald Trump is a traitor to this country, and Vladimir Putin actually put him in office. For 2 years, this country has been listening to the news about that stuff. And then an investigator that has 2 years to investigate and no unlimited amount of money, and all these lawyers comes out and says, we have absolutely no proof to any of that stuff. Can't prove it, any of it. So, and we've been talking about it for 2 years. So for 2 years, I believed these people, that what they were saying on TV was true, because they supposedly knew stuff that was going to prove it. And in the end, the people who had all the powers to investigate come out and say, we have no proof. We cannot charge them with any crime. We can't see any wrongdoing. We can't prove that anything was done wrong. And for 2 years, they've been digging, like, okay, if somebody took an investigation in my life for 2 years, what would they find? 2 years under investigation by people who have no limits in money, they can find anything they want. But the truth is, I've been listening to these people saying all these things, and they had no proof. Now, some people didn't believe a word of what was said for 2 years. And they said, none of that is true, because there's no proof. Other people said, oh no, he did it, he did it, he did it, he did it. So what made one group decide and another group not decide? Because some people choose to wait for evidence, other people choose to say, oh no, I don't need evidence, I already believe it, he's a bad guy. That's it, done. I mean, that's a silly example, but it's from a very recent time in our history that you guys remember and have been through this, and so you kind of understand, because our whole country has been tied up with this news on TV for 2 years about Trump being this and Trump being that, and they have nothing to prove, You're going to accuse the president, you better have some proof. So, all right, that's our chapter 4. Hopefully it makes sense. Any questions? Anything that I need to reiterate, repeat, restate?